All right, now let's get into, again, the situation of these people that have been going to these pro-Hamas rallies, not protest, pro-Hamas rallies in the past couple of days, deliberately intended to be violent in their rhetoric, let alone some of this stuff that we've seen around town, both in Melbourne and in Sydney, about people literally being intimidated because they are Jewish. And when I mean intimidated, people looking to kill the Jews. How did we get here? How did we get to this place? James Paterson is the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. It would be in part his responsibility about the immigration system. But this is not about the immigration system. This is about national security, because many of the people that are involved in the protests that were wildly out of control in Sydney, the ones that are planning to go again on Sunday, and the people that are threatening people in the streets or going looking for people in Toorak, were born here. So, James, how do we, apart from a bunch of speeches, how do we make sure that somebody who is born here does not end up in a collective of people of a few hundred that are willing to spew racial hatred out the front of landmarks like the Sydney Opera House?
Paul, this is a really important and fundamental point. There's been a lot of steam being let off on social media in the last couple of days, and that's understandable. And one of the very common themes is, why don't we just deport all these people? Well, many of the people, if not most of the people involved in these rallies and protests, were born here, were raised here, were educated here, and are Australian citizens and have never known any other nation. And in some ways, it's much worse that people born and raised here in our culture and our values are displaying such appalling behaviour and appalling judgement on these issues. It's not so simple as to dismiss it as someone who was raised somewhere else with a different value set. They should have been raised here with good Australian values. I think we clearly do have a problem in this country if at least as many young people as you're displaying on your screen right now for your viewers think it's okay to behave in this way, think it's okay to incite violence against another people in our country on the basis of their heritage or their faith. It's an appalling thing. I think it's got to start with us asserting our Australian values, our universal Australian values, and leadership from the top. No moral equivocation, no false equivalences, no tolerance for this kind of behaviour. And the political leaders who in the last few days have hedged their bets, have equivocated a bit, who haven't been as clear, I think have done us a great disservice as a nation, because we have to send a very clear message to these people that their behaviour is utterly unacceptable and one will not be tolerated.
There was a poll that came out, it was partially funded by the federal government, that said 37% of Australians have pride in their nation. Now, pride in their nation has meant different things over different years, but let's be honest, I'm not pretending that everyone has to go back and salute the flag and, you know, some sort of pledge of allegiance at the start of each and every day, or you know, carry on like the Scouts, dib and all the rest of it, right? But there is something that I think we have not modernised or we have let go in being able to rally around pride in a country, regardless of where you, your parents or your grandparents were born, because your first and immediate loyalty should always be to the country of which you were born in. But there are a great many people who see cultural lineage as something that's more important than the country that they live in. Now, again, this is a 2-minute hit on television, I get it, we can't solve the world's problems. But do we actually have to start to look at this as well? Not about a bunch of people being able to say, can you name, you know, the 7 places where Don Bradman got a century, but those basic values about respect for the genders, about respect for other people's faith, about the respect for public places, about the respect for interpersonal safety, that we have to readdress this conversation, because I think that's part of our problem here.
I agree with you, Paul. I think a big part of it is the education system. I think young people have been raised, you know, my generation onwards in particular, maybe not the case for some older generations, but certainly from my generation onwards, to hear much at all that is good about Australia and is good about our history. Now, I'm not someone who in any way supports whitewashing history and pretending that our history is perfect. That would be an equally inappropriate thing to do. But the balance is clearly wrong, and the unifying symbols that we used to be able to unite around, which in a previous generation might have been the monarchy or the church or the flag or Australia Day, those have all been undermined, and generations of young people have now been taught there's nothing particularly good or special about Australia at all. And if you teach people that there's no pride in our nation, there's nothing good about our nation, well then you wouldn't have any loyalty or commitment to our nation, and no loyalty or commitment to the values of our nation. And like you say, some of those fundamental principles which actually make you Australia unique, which make it such an attractive place for people from all around the world to come to, like our commitment to freedoms, individual freedoms, like freedom of speech and religious liberty, but also our pluralism and our tolerance and our openness. If those things aren't taught as virtues in our education system, well, unsurprised, surprise, people aren't going to value them and they aren't going to uphold them themselves in the way they behave.
Good man. James, I wish we had all night, but I just want to get you on because this is a conversation we're going to have at some point. But of course, any conversation about national pride immediately becomes, look at those two white blokes on top. You get the point. James, thank you, mate. Do appreciate it. Of course, the Home Affairs Minister and a man who's right across his brief. Really good bloke.